Greetings and welcome to the energy of the sixth house. This is Ron from Tarot the Twin Sun. Welcome, my Virgoans. This is a reading for the month of October, the introduction of the first at 5 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. And we'll be looking at the role of Mercury and how that is being bolstered or lifted or afflicted in some way, shape, or form. And the beauty of it is that Mercury is essentially going direct. It is quite auspicious in that what I see for the month of October is essentially a way to kind of shake people up in terms of coming back to reality, I would call it. There's a grip, and essentially this allows for this coming back. A lot of the people you're dealing with have Neptune in retrograde in Pisces, okay? For that essentially creates an opposition, okay? An opposition between Mercury and Neptune sort of creates a veil, especially when they're both in retrograde, a veil, but then it's also it opens up an opportunity for being able to pierce the veil, okay, and see reality for what it is, as it is. And this type of reality has to do with essentially the analysis of relationships, coming to terms with relating to others and addressing some of the karmas that have been pushed out in terms of Mars and Gemini in the 10th house, in your 10th house, okay? And this allows for primarily a way to address the outer world, okay, and its manifestations, its polarities, and to see how the actions there, they affect your sense of self, the clarity of your sense of self, especially when it comes to the way you think about yourself, okay, which has been, or the way you think in general. There's been a terrible difficulty in actually addressing a sense of what your intelligence has to do in terms of your thinking. There's a sort of distinguished quality, I would call it, an intelligence that becomes revealed in terms of the momentum of the month, how it unveils with Mercury going direct, and it allowing for a clearer vision of the self, of the mirror, okay, that occurs on this axis of Virgo and Pisces, okay. Now the interesting thing is that you are going to be able to creatively see some of the changes that are occurring on a holistic level, on a more grander macro level, in terms of especially your relations, the ones that actually you care about in terms of them giving you a sense of creativity. You could look to others, essentially, who are independent by nature, who are affirmative by nature, they get things done. But the difficulty is that there's this latent Pluto retrograde in Capricorn that has to do with essentially the transformation of systems, of structures, of a way of thinking that has been blocking in some way, shape, or form in terms of your own realization, your own self-realization. There is a cluster, Mercury in retrograde, as well as Venus and Sun here in your first and second houses, which point to essentially fruition, fructification, trying to come up with a way to address your everyday, what you do in terms of how you self-reflect, in terms of your own economic endeavors, your trades, your work. And there is a need to balance all of that with essentially Libra being in the second house cusp and the sun lightly touching it. There's a chance to self-realize in all of this. Sun leading this conjunction on the highest degree essentially creates an interesting polarity. The difficulty is that the people that you are dealing with, they are far-reaching in places that are unrealistic or unpragmatic in their approach to the quest for truth, the quest for freedom, the quest to do something in terms of faith or spirituality. It's difficult for you to not be critical on them, to not have a sharp tongue on what they do, having a say in terms of that. There is a need to find harmony with these people, but with Jupiter in retrograde in Mars, it's somewhat difficult. This is not an easy time in terms of dealing with other people. Okay. There is options for the proclivities of romance, the ability to also deal with forms of repression, sexual repression that others may be having. And this allows you to actually actively observe them and to learn from them in some way, shape, or form. It actually helps to learn from them. It's not the initial wit or the initial caliber of mind that brings you to this realization. It's something different. It has to do with innocence as well as it's the type of innocence that comes with the social regulations of what is expected in terms of sex or creativity, or even the game of romance. And being able to observe that it is something of a delusion that they may inhabit, or perhaps even your own need to understand them or their impulses. It becomes saturated, and the less you think about it, the more it makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. When it comes to trying to assert yourself and how you reflect to these other people, you have to open up in terms of the houses of Dharma, the 1, the 5, and the 9, the main Trikona houses. And these are highly activated for you in that it brings forward the triplicity of Earth, the ability to be realistic, and also to approach your path when it comes to Dharma in such a way that it addresses the changes that are occurring on a mass level and how these changes are not being able to be perceived in terms of what the world is becoming around you. So you can weigh these things up, these transactions, these micro changes on a worldly level, on a global level, and they may be very difficult to calculate, but over time, once Pluto and Uranus go direct, this time of early October will show you something that you may have missed in terms of not thinking, but ideologies that should be emerging in terms of your ability to sense these things on an auric level, on an etheric level, that is still grossly tied to the material realm. So, if you are conducting business of any sort, one could say that there's a way to work from home and work with the outside world in order to find an innovation in how work can be brought about. work situations can be brought about and not affecting a negative in terms of karma, not affecting in terms of that. Okay, so to clarify, there is a way to embody yourself, to become internalized and to express an exploration of the internal. Okay, that's Moon in Sagittarius in the 4th house. And these come in direct conflict with what is actually occurring karmically outside. I think from a Virgoan standpoint, it might be wise to address the obstacles that are occurring on a global level, on something that is greater than you, that is societal in nature or international in nature, and to understand the motivations, the dual motivations, in order to understand this period as being a testing period for experimentation on a gross level. Okay, this activates the main Trikona houses, the 1, the 5, and 9, and gives you a sense of dharma in it all. But it is intended to test the mettle of your own emotional prowess, okay, emotionally intelligent prowess, and to see how the actions of others are antithetical or opposite to this knowing. Okay, so it provides a sense of an opportunity arising in terms of preserving your own inner truth, as it creates difficulty with an outer realization, with a karmic sort of collective energy that is highly accentuated with Mars in Gemini in your 10th house, the ascendant squaring up with that in retrograde in Virgo, of course, your ruler, as well as the 7th house, Neptune in retrograde. So it's like there's a collective delusion or illusion, a veil, that is tied directly to the main, excuse me, the main houses of the system, which is the 1, 4, 7, 10. Okay, which allows for the ability to cut through the bullshit by preserving that in which you are exploring on the inner realm. Okay, so even if the world is collapsing around you, relationships are not so good, they're extremely romantic for the wrong reasons. And I mean romantic not just in terms of love and ambition and love, but I'm talking about naivety, the inability to live up to expectations that are drawn or droned up by the outer world, by this energy of Mercury and Mars and Mercury, basically pushing forward 2 pillars of the gateway that is the wrong gateway, or potentially a gateway that is not yet meant to be understood by yours truly or by Virgoans, Mercury in retrograde. But as it goes direct, essentially, this fast mover will bring forward great realizations. So one of the blessings that I do see is with all this disorderly sort of intensity when it comes to foreign affairs, wars, and news, essentially the news that is outside, in terms of stability, bad economy, and all of that, and the dragon's head tightly sort of conjuncting it, Mars and Uranus in retrograde. Sorry, Rahu, North Node, and Uranus in retrograde in Taurus in your 9th house. This allows you to pull back and essentially get some sort of latent realization when you're not thinking about it, where there may be some sort of information that comes about the difficulty that is being produced with Saturn in retrograde in Aquarius, a difficulty of a new age or a new way of doing things that is coming about. There's a lot of collapse going on, and I'd hate to be one of those controversial sort of nitpickers when it comes to what's going on, on the macro level, at least when it comes to gross realities and accumulations of karmas on a collective level. There's a lot going on, and what I'm seeing here is the ability to point to the third and the fifth houses surrounding the fourth. Okay, that has to do with the past lessons of Scorpio, past lives, collective sort of shared mentalities as well. In your third house, activating a sense of karma with siblings, friends, trying to understand those, and also the fifth house, how your relationships with them are creatively blocked in some sort of way with the transformations that really need to occur in terms of the 10th and the 8th houses, okay, which are sort of pointing to what I see here. What it's pointing to essentially a way to come up with a type of order in the chaos that is tied directly to resourcefulness and the ability to have some sort of emotional understanding with worldly things, have some sort of value system with all of that. There's an ability to be set free from all of that if you distinguish your own inner world that allows for great realization in terms of your own inner world's relationship to the outer world, how there is a reflection about some difficult things when it comes to collective karmas, okay, that are being brought about in order to shake up this energy of Saturn retrograde in Aquarius. Essentially, what I'm trying to say here is that there's a collective change going on that you can actually look into from an outer perspective, okay, and explore new potentialities, new ways of thinking, new truths that are your own, that are distinguishably your own, as opposed to collective, and to not get lost in that, but essentially to have an understanding, a critical perspective on it. The idea here is to embrace Mercury as it goes direct in the next day after and into October. And as it pushes forward, there's some degree of resonance that you can have when it comes to relating to others. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and move on. I will pull up a generator here. This is going to be the first time I'm christening a generator for you all. And we'll go ahead and generate 3 times. Okay, so what I see here is an ability to understand breakthroughs right now. This has to do with truths that are given to you by an etheric or higher plane of consciousness. It could be your own self, a sense of the breath that makes life worth living. This has to do also with the sense of the crown of creation, the mother of all ideologies, or the mothers of invention. Trying to come up with a way to think and produce a voice is coming for you in October, and is going to be here very prevalent. Meaning that when Mercury inhabits its own domicile and moves forward into Libra, great truths can occur when it comes to trying to understand how people are bringing you these truths, or are being very truthful in nature, or you're being truthful to yourself. And this allows for great realizations, okay? Highest realizations, intelligence, as well as a natural flow of your mental capacities. This is a very auspicious thing, especially because Mercury is in Virgo on the 1st, and will be moving around and oscillating around that area into Libra. Okay, which is a very good way to detach and become objective about certain things. Less subjectivity is actually a good thing, unless you are preserving unless you're incorporating empathy this month. It really depends up to you whether or not you're going to be empathic. There's an ability essentially to to have an elevated coldness and intellectual capacity. Now, there's a distinguished nature in which the modes in which we communicate, our words, our language, our body language, these are symbolic of potentially a higher consciousness. But try not to become too cutting when it comes to the elaboration or the elucidation, trying to say what you mean. There's a difference between knowing and thinking, knowing and saying, and that's just something that should be observed in the month of October. In the past, I do see a coming to head, a way to bring forward a sense of inspiration, insight, deep insight when it comes to your own spiritual meanderings, or your own inspirations in terms of new projects, new things. I see here a conversion of this energy, trying to cut that off in a way, to nip it at the bud, okay, before a flower can develop, or some form of flowering can develop. There is a transmutation from the element of fire into air, okay, which are potentially harmonious. At the same time, they negate each other. So what is left here between the Ace of Swords and the Ace of Wands is essentially a negation, okay? Meaning that you could be inspired. There's something new about everything. You just don't know what it is. You can't intellectualize it. And from the past, you can't know, you can't bring to light, essentially, some of these passions or this fervor, this new energy. And then you are left at a standstill, okay? The trick is to, as you move into the future, there's something about what you're going through now of this general fog, of inspiration, but then also of newness, but then you can't really put your finger on what it is. There will be an ability to bring forward from the Six of Swords, with addition of the Ace of Swords, the Seven of Swords, the ability to get away with this fog. Okay, so it's sort of like a magician's trick, fog and mirrors, and trying to understand what is going on with all of that. There's a lot of magic that is in the air. And there's also this sort of, this flood from the future, some sort of empathic or emotional understanding, some undertow that is trailing you when it comes to you dealing with the future, Virgo, the future version of yourself, trying to understand why it's coming back from the future into the present in order to bring forward what can be gleaned in terms of a choice, and in terms of also bringing forward your thoughts into the future. Okay, so it's a very rubber bandy reading. But what I'm seeing here is essentially a progression into the future with it would be the Five of Swords and the Two of Swords. So the idea here is to find a still point in all of this, to use forms of sadhana, meditation, any form of intellectual exercises, okay? When it comes to measuring your thoughts, measuring how they produce certain effects, coming to the truth of what really inspires you, what really brings forward a sense of the dharmic path of how to do things, okay? And to find terra firma in some sort of way. Try to ground yourself when it comes to all of this energy. You will be able to do that. But it requires the stillness of mind, the ability to not choose one or the other, to see in between those and to find the middle path, okay? And that will allow you to move into the future gracefully. This has to do with a lesson of Saturn, I believe, which is in retrograde in Aquarius. And it also activates, that energy activates, let me see. It activates your 4th house as well as your 10th house, addressing certain karmas by not acting and walking the gateway into the pillars of the infinite. There is an ability to essentially find a sense of exploration, experimentation of your own inner world, and that seed bringing forward lessons when it comes to how you relate to others in general. That is the best I can do for now. I do wish you well, and sorry for the delay of this. I'm going through a process of moving. I do wish you well, and take care, my dear Virgos. Bye-bye.